Thank you, everyone. Thank you for being here. My name is Sam Fein. I'm the curator of the exhibition, The Corrections. And this exhibition was born out of my work as an activist, in particular, fighting against the systemic institutional abuse within the troubled teen industry. For those who don't know, I'll just give a brief overview. The troubled teen industry is a multi-billion-dollar behavior modification industry, and it can include residential treatment centers, wilderness programs, boot camps, religious reform schools, therapeutic boarding schools, and any number of institutions that are advertised or designed to change unwanted behavior, the unwanted being determined by the sending party. And this exhibition was about taking the narrative and the experiences within the troubled teen industry, the TTI, and sharing it from the perspective of those who lived it. The dominant narrative of this industry and its dominant portrayal in the media has been by the industry itself. This is a multi-billion-dollar industry, and people within this industry will go through great lengths to discredit allegations of abuse or mistreatment from people with lived experience, also known as survivors. And so it was really important to me to be able to have people with lived experience have their voice and have their experiences spoken and portrayed and held in a public setting. A little bit about the venue. This place is called the Foundry. It's located in Cambridge, Massachusetts. It is a converted foundry, and it's an innovation hub and makerspace. It has a variety of all sorts of different 3D printing, dance studios, etc. And what's really exciting about it is they have a gallery space with a wall of windows overlooking the rest of the venue. And so it really enables people who aren't necessarily involved in the art world or would normally go to an art exhibition to be able to come by and enter the space. So the main themes within this exhibition that the artists portray is looking at not just the firsthand experiences within the TTI programs and what occurs within these programs, but also having the perspective of adulthood and reflecting on the ways in which these experiences continue to reverberate as an adult. Some of the larger themes also deal with society's ongoing use of confinement, surveillance, and coercive control in an attempt to change behaviors, and to challenge our assumptions about who deserves or is entitled to live in civil society. Another issue I was really thinking about when creating this exhibition is the way in which issues of gender and sexuality intersect within the troubled teen industry. Specifically for me, I was reflecting on centuries of historical precedent in which ideas of madness or social constructions of abnormality are used in particular to hold female bodies institutionalized or captive for engaging in non-gender conforming behavior, which can include not acting in traditional femininity, et cetera, and also can include being queer. These places is illegal to advertise as a gay conversion program, but many of these using sort of coded language like negative peer influence, et cetera, will practice de facto gay conversion or trans conversion therapy. So anyway, as we enter the exhibition space, we can see on the wall here where we have the wall text, there's a shelf. And so on the shelf is a series of zines. And for those who don't know what a zine is it originates sort of in punk rock culture, but it's a handmade magazine that's usually done sort of DIY style and can be reproduced easily and passed around. And so I created a zine giving an overview of the troubled teen industry. I realized for a lot of people, this is their first introduction into this world. And I felt like viewers like literally needed a glossary to understand parts of it. So these zines people can take with them as they move about the exhibit, and it can provide greater context. It also has resources to video podcasts, to survivor organizations, books, etc., for more information about the TTI for people who, after the exhibit, would be interested in learning more. And those are take homes that the viewer can then take with them. To the right of that, we have a piece by one of the participating artists, MASS MoCA, and it's called Hell of a Drug. And as you can see, there's a lockbox, and inside the lockbox are a variety of prescription bottles. And what the artist did is she created customized labels that say things like, take one to never feel the same. Take one not to trust yourself. And viewers are invited when they come to the exhibition to take one of the pills from the bottle. They're actually candy in there, but they look similar to pills. And to, again, it's participatory in that way. So the pills within these programs, chemical restraint is often used to sedate or control. So the pills are emblematic of that, but also speak to a wider idea of sort of institutional indoctrination. And what, so the artist is saying, like, not just the bitter pill of the medication, but taking the pill of the program itself and being forced to sort of absorb its ideology. And so it's kind of like the Matrix. Viewers take the red pill and then they enter the world of the TTI and this exhibit. So on the far side of the wall, we have a collection of different TTI ads and ephemera. And these ads are going to date from about the mid 20th century into perhaps the early mid-aughts. And they look a little dated now. Frankly, I find them a little amusing at this point because they seem so cliche in some ways, so many exclamation points. But one thing I really want to emphasize that's a little bit hard to read based on our perspective currently are the promises that are sold to families and the unrealistic expectations that these programs advertise. So in two of the ads, you would see warranties. So there is a warranty that if your child if an old behavior pattern returns, one of the programs, the colorful ad, will give free readmission to up to 60 days. And so again, it's emblematic of the ways in which programs oversell the results and the idea that they can mold a child into a way that's it's more desirable. But also it talks about the enormous pressure that it's put on survivors. So it's not just when adolescents enter this program that they must perform, but then upon leaving, there's still that pressure to perform or to portray oneself as quote unquote cured in order not to be returned. So in you're also going to see two pieces of ephemera. One is a psychiatric note, and one is a rule from a student handbook. And again, they're a little hard to read, but on the top left, we have hygiene standards, and this is taken from a student handbook of a residential program. And it says, hair must be clean and combed. No dreadlocks. And then in the bottom, we have an actual note from a psychiatrist, which says something to this might not be verbatim, but it says something to the effect of, the patient appears coquettish and is wearing a low-cut gown. We will start on 500 milligrams of Depakote. And again, so taking these various texts from parts of the TTI and sourcing them, and then presenting them sort of outside of their original context, you can see some of the ways in which these programs systemically have racism and sexism bound up within the structure of the program and within the people operating these programs and making the decisions about what is and isn't acceptable behavior. To the left, we have an installation, and this is, again, part of this series, Inflammatory Observations. And this piece is called Stupid Shit People Say to Survivors. And the text is sourced from a survivor group, online group, in which people were talking about some of the responses or things that people will say in response when someone shares their experience within the TTI. So things like, it couldn't have been that bad. Why didn't you run away? Why didn't you behave? I'm sure they meant well. Oh, it looks like a camp. Oh, why don't you write a book? Why don't you forget about it, et cetera, et cetera. And then these are encased in plexiglass and with the fasteners around the side to be referential of a hospital or a psychiatric hospital, which is the way they'll encase a lot of their signage. And it's designed to go, it's about, I'd say like 6-7 feet. And so it's designed to go really high, almost so that when the viewer comes up to it, it's like they have to look up and it kind of overwhelms them with the messaging they're receiving. Continuing to the left, we see 2 posters. One is what happened and what I learned, and the other one is internalized beliefs and how they play out. And these are done by another one of the artists, Belle Lopes. And they're really presented, these posters are presented in a matter-of-fact way, almost like you could imagine like giving an educational seminar and, you know, diagramming, here are the internalized beliefs and how they play out as a result of these experiences. So in this case, the artist deconstructs some very common things that occur. Each program has its own idiosyncrasies, but there is kind of common themes that will appear throughout each program, one being physical restraint, the other being forced medication, and the third being isolation. And then the things that come, you know, the messages that one receives about oneself based on these experiences. So then moving from there, we have a piece by the same artist that's called Fragmented. And in the middle, obviously it says, so you want me to be an adult now. So the idea is the viewer moves about the space and getting all the messaging received from society, all the negative messaging and all the messaging that's been internalized as a result of these behaviors. Suddenly, and again, this is true of many people who are placed in institutions or high control environments. They're premised on the idea that if you remove someone from society and place them in an environment that in no way replicates their community and hold them there for a long period of time, sometimes the entirety of people's adolescence, then suddenly they're dropped back into the world with the expectation that they will engage in adult behaviors and adult functioning. And so this piece really calls into question that assumption, and then also just highlights the enormous pressure that survivors face upon entering the adult world after a period of prolonged confinement. Okay. Well, there's a car alarm in the background. I hope it's not too loud and annoying for people. Can people hear it really badly? Okay, awesome. So on this wall, we're going to see it's bookended by 2 giant pieces on acrylic. They're 4-foot pieces, also by Belle Lopes. And one is called Messages Received, and the other is called Too Much to Hold Alone. So in Messages Received, we see a picture of the figure, again, speaking to the messages that either are indirectly implicit within the nature of the program or directly stated by people within the program. You're the problem, out of control, you can't be trusted, something is wrong with you, broken, bad, etc. And then we have the central figure just hiding her face in shame. And then on the other side, we have Too Much to Hold Alone. And so this is, again, some of the resulting feeling like a burden, feeling one's, because there can be issues, let's say somebody comes into the program experiencing depression. So they already have whatever issues were considered to send them away. Plus on top of that, all the things that come from these programs and having to hold them all inside and present as as a certain way, the artist is just expressing how overwhelming that is and how it's too much to hold alone, literally bowing over from the weight of these burdens. And then in the middle, we have a series of collages, mixed media digital collages by MASS MoCA. And we can see the one in the top left, that's called Sparkle and Shine for Safety, 3 exclamation points. And what this piece is, it's a recreation of a sticker board that says at the top, sparkle and shine for safety. And it says morning, noon, afternoon, night, etc. And what it was a chart in which in the artist, every time the artist maintained safety, then with a staff member, she put a little star on the chart. And the artist really felt like that was incredibly infantilizing and not appropriate for a teenager. And so that was part of what she was trying to communicate with that piece. On the top right, we have a piece called Still. And this piece is about mechanical restraint. So if you look at Self, the piece with the buckle, it's supposed to be emblematic of buckles, kind of what you would put around one's extremities. And throughout the piece, written on it says still, all over, still, still, still. And in that case, the artist is making reference to when someone's being restrained, generally a staff member can often be telling the person, hold still. And the artist pointed out that irony of telling somebody to hold still when they're being immobilized. In the bottom center is a self-portrait of the artist. And the artist is standing in front of a former residential place that she attended that has now been shut down. And I'm going to read the text that's on there since it's a little hard to see. But it says, they say time heals all wounds, and I don't know if that's true. But as the years pass, what hurt me the most has become the thing I draw my values from. And make the promise I've made to myself is less about wanting to die and more about being a kinder person than those who tried to break me. And the piece is called A Farewell to the Place That Tried to Break Me. And the artist is standing there with her middle finger in the air. And so while the artist is in part enjoying her freedom and saying F you to this place that harmed her, she's also talking about using these experiences and using them to be a better person and how ways in which she can transform or utilize the suffering and abuse that she suffered in order to find a better way of being in the world. So then moving on to the main wall, we have 2 paintings on the left there, and those were done by me. And I want to say a little bit about my decision to include my own work in the exhibition, which was something, some curators do it, but it was something I gave much thought to because initially I wasn't going to. But there were a couple of reasons I did. Well, one is I had work relevant for the show. 2 is I recognized that the artists who participated in this exhibition were really taking an enormous risk and really put themselves out there and were vulnerable and honest and raw in a way that's very brave. And I felt like I couldn't ask that of them if I wasn't willing to do it myself. And then I think the other important thing for me is that as news of the TTI and as the stories are starting to circulate in popular culture, there has been sort of a grab for attention, and particularly within news media, people have felt, it's been wonderful on one hand for survivors to share their stories, but on the other hand, there have been times where survivors felt exploited and like people were just sort of extracting the most salacious, horrific details they could. And I wanted to make clear that I wasn't a curator coming in with, oh, I heard about this thing and now I want to solicit artists who can share their innermost intimate details from, for this exhibition, but to be clear that this exhibition is grounded in lived experience and in my ongoing activism. So the piece on the left is called Gooned, Gooned. And this is where it's nice to have the glossary. Gooning is a colloquial term that kids use to describe a phenomenon that's often employed by TTI programs. It's often used as the entryway into the TTI. And so what these parents will do, or what the programs will do, is they'll encourage parents to hire escorts. And escorts are, generally like football player type people that while the kid is asleep in bed in the middle of the night, the escorts will pull them out of bed. Sometimes sometimes they'll use blindfolds, handcuffs, hoods, that sort of thing, and restrain them and stuff them in a car and take them to fill in the blank. Usually it's Utah. And so this, again, the young people are essentially being kidnapped, and that's what the experience feels like. People will report nightmares decades later. And so one's entry into the TTI, even before they enter these programs, is steeped in trauma. And you can see the ghost kind of looming over the figure. On the bottom left, it sort of is reminiscent of a adolescent's bed, and then it sort of starts to merge into a canyon scene. There are a lot of small details within these paintings that might not necessarily be able to capture from this perspective. There's, again, and sometimes there are little things that I'll insert into the paintings that are little jokes or references that perhaps not everyone's going to get. And that's okay. But to me, sometimes it's like little hidden jokes that I put in just for survivors, or even just a little something for myself. But I'm happy for people to interpret the pieces more broadly in the way that sort of speaks to them. The piece on the right is called Team. And in general, throughout my life, I've kind of used cheerleaders as a metaphor of sort of the idea that we were girls that needed to be taught to be more cheery. And within this piece, again, you're seeing things that we were taught to be ashamed of. So you can see the person at the top, that's the shirt is a reference to the trans flag. The person that's sort of foregrounded has a marijuana tattoo on their back. There's lots of piercings. The figure on the right has natural hair. There's self-harm scars. And these figures are dancing and celebrating. And it's not so much like they're glorifying these things, but more like these were the things they were taught to be ashamed about. And they're going to take it and own it and dance with it. So from there, we have the piece on the right, and that's Exiled to the Depths of Her Own Heart. And again, this is about protecting oneself when the reality of the present situation gets too painful, and how people might exile parts of themselves in order to survive. So in the center of the gallery is a three-dimensional piece. And this piece was created with participation from all the artists, plus a contribution from some people who were not in the show. And this piece is called A View from Inside. So visitors can actually enter the tent, and there's writing on the wall, paint pen, phrases contributed by the participating artists. And then there's a projector screen, and it's projecting images, a slideshow of the artists during their teenage years when they were in TTI. So the tent is referential to wilderness programs, which are programs similar to Outward Bound, but far more extreme and non-consensual, in which kids spend months outdoors and sleep in it. Usually they sleep in something actually not as nice as that. But then surrounding the tent are these banners. And these banners were sourced from present day TTI ads. These are not the literal ads as was presented earlier, the historical documents. These were stitched together, but the imagery itself and the phrases on there, the phrases, that one says, let's see, tough love can change behavior. real love can last a lifetime. That phrasing, there's different phrases on each banner, but those are all taken from TTI ads as well. And the banners and the projection screen are held up by zip ties. And the significance of the zip ties is that they're often used as a form of restraint when transporting the kid to the wilderness program. So when viewers enter the tent, it becomes a confined space, right? So the exterior with the banners is what's presented to the outside world. And then within the tent, that is what's going on within the interior self, as well as it's indicative of the way in which people are separated from society. So once the viewer's inside the tent, I mean, if they were to zip the tent behind them, the only view that they have to the outside is from the ceiling, that little mesh ceiling. And so the viewer enters the space and is cognizant of the world going on around them, can hear the voices of the outside world, but yet is trapped inside. And again, that speaks to the experience of teenagers within TTI. They know that the world is going on, and yet in a way it feels like it's passing without them. And then the imagery that's used in the slideshow, again, it's of of the participating artists when they were teenagers. And that really harkens to how young an adolescent is or a teenager is. The artists in this exhibition are adults now, and so they're looking at these experiences and reflecting and making meaning of it as adults. But when these experiences were actually happening, they were kids. And a lot of times adolescents don't have the language that we have as adults, or didn't fully understand what was going on when it was happening, in part due to extensive gaslighting. So again, it's a reminder how young these children are when these things are happening. Something that I wanted to discuss that's not in the physical space is that the exhibition is really supposed to be a form of protest and creative activism. I feel like the artworks, they form a collective voice in addition to each artist having an individual voice. And the exhibition extends beyond the exhibition space with, let me see if I know how to do this. All right. All right, can people see that? Yeah, okay, great. So I conceived of the exhibition as in being a form of creative protest. The artists are resisting the narratives that have been shoved down their throat. The program saved your life narrative, that one you get a lot. I won't go into all the tropes. They're resisting that, and they're presenting their truth to the world. And that is a form of activism. And then the exhibition extends beyond the gallery space with an actual protest that we held on this Monday. And it was in front of the Massachusetts State House. And it was about the Judge Rottenberg Center. And I'll just, really briefly, for those who don't know, the Judge Rottenberg Center is a facility located in Canton, Massachusetts, that houses disabled and mostly disabled and autistic children and adults. And for decades, they've been they're the only place in the country to do this. They use these devices. You can see how they're affixed on the person's leg. They also have it in a little backpack with these electrodes. And if the person, quote unquote, misbehaves, then they receive a painful electric shock. So it's essentially like a shock collar for children. And the FDA went in to rule a federal ban specifically for this facility, then they appealed the ban. And so the protest is about H-180 supporting legislation in Massachusetts that would end the use of aversive therapies that cause physical pain. And this is, and deny a reasonable existence to people with disabilities. And this isn't just for congregate care settings for youth. This is also going to include nursing homes and other, psychiatric hospitals and other places where vulnerable people are held in congregate care. And then I'll show, let's see, this is, and so that's a picture of some of the protesters together in front of the State House. And there's yours truly right there. So Yeah, in general, this protest is about reclaiming one's narrative and about taking ownership of one's narrative and using that to express one's truth, and also as a form of resistance to the institutions and systems that have tried to silence oneself. The end.
Thank you so much to our curator, Sam Fein, for this eye-opening exhibition. We will open the chat for questions. We did have one question from Giovanni, who asks, I take it that the exhibition is a themed open call. Given that, have they all, and I assume that means that all the artists involved, have they had any personal experiences of the subject matter?
Yeah, maybe I wasn't explicit about that. So all the artists who were selected for the exhibition have lived experience in the TTI, including the curator.
Wow. And then I wanted to ask, you mentioned gaslighting, and I wondered who in these programs define, like, what behavior is problematic for kids? The parents? Is it the program directors?
It's both. I mean, within the program itself, obviously they have their own set of rules, but I mean, part of that can also be driven by the family. So this I sort of alluded to earlier. Let's say you have a parent that does not approve of their child's being gay, or they're not practicing the family's desired religion, right? So they'll tell the program that this is the issue, and the program then might push in a certain direction versus a parent that says, I'm, whatever, I'm cool with my kid being gay. Maybe then the program is going to do less sort of conversion type stuff. Yeah, once you're placed in the system, you are isolated from the rest of the world. So communication with your parents is cut off, censored, monitored. Generally, if in a lot of these places, if a kid says something negative about the program, they'll hang up the phone. And the parents are groomed too. Even before some of these programs, even before the kid is placed in the program, they'll say, you're going to hear some negative things. You might hear some negative things online. These are attention-seeking, bitter alumni. Don't listen to it. Your kid is trying to manipulate you, et cetera, et cetera. You'll hear that a lot. And that's actually how a number of deaths within this program occur. I didn't go into the details of, the extensive cases of death and abuse, but a lot of it is due to medical neglect. There was someone who just passed away in December of last year due to medical neglect. She had sepsis. She was clearly sick, and she was denied life-saving medical care.
I'm sorry to hear. And I want to say, so we have from Alyssa, sorry if I pronounced your name incorrectly. Alyssa Hunt says, amazing work. Sarah Golightly says, thank you. The art is so good and resonates a lot. And I wanted to ask as well, I wanted to thank you first, you and the artists involved, for being so vulnerable and sharing. What makes this the time? What made this the time for you to curate this exhibition?
Yeah, so there were a number of factors. So activists and TTI activists have been around for decades. I was involved with some stuff in the earlier iteration back in like 2006, 2007. There were a couple of bills presented to the Senate. Some just died on the Senate floor. One passed the House and then didn't move forward. There was, and again, sort of the momentum died out. I think what's changed since then, there are a number of things that have changed. One is social media is a whole different animal than it was 15 years ago. And that's really been wonderful in a way that it's enabled survivors / activists to connect. Before, you have people coming from all parts of the country, then they dissipate and go to whatever location they're from or another program. And it was really hard to connect and organize the way that people are today. I would say that cultural attitudes have shifted. So when the phenomenon of the TTI really blew up, I mean, it began in the 70s, right? And it really started to blow up in the 90s, early aughts, in conjunction with the war on drugs, the fear of the juvenile super predator, tough on crime. And I think as a society, we've seen the ravages of mass incarceration. We've seen that A, it hasn't been effective, and B, it's destroyed communities. And so I think we're at a place now where we can start, and I think, and COVID helped with this too. COVID helped in the sense, number one, of normalizing people to have meetings online like this from all over the country to organize and be activists. And I also think during COVID, some of the social unrest that occurred really created space for a lot of these institutions that have been so entrenched that we have just taken for granted as immobile things, that maybe it's time to rethink and deconstruct them. On top of that, I will say that Paris Hilton's documentary was a galvanizing force because she has such a large platform. So she really was able to bring attention to the issue. And also I would say that people getting older has also been helpful. I think initially a lot of survivors in the activist spaces were, let's say, still in college. And it's much easier when you have the people with the initials and the fancy degrees saying these people don't know what they're talking about. Now, many of us, our generation, have the fancy degrees. And so that gains us another level of legitimacy that perhaps wasn't there before.
Thank you. Norma says, thank you so much. And again, the chat is open for questions. Beverly asks, Sam, were there any positive takeaways from being in these programs at the time?
Yeah. So one thing I do want to say is that a lot of times the programs will say, it's not all bad, right? And they want you to say, oh, it wasn't all bad. And or like right now there's been, I mean, like literally they send messages to families saying, right, write us a positive review on it, Yelp. Like they have a whole website that they've created, like, anyway. And so okay, so what bothers me about that is the way it's presented is, oh, there are all these bad things happening. Like we admit that, but there are good things too, right? And so it kind of evens itself out. And so before I answer this question, so in my opinion, kids are being abused and dying. And I don't care what positive things are happening over here. This doesn't balance out. So yeah, so keeping that in mind, positive takeaways from being in the program, because there were some positive things that I took away from it. Let's see, one thing that's, I mean, perhaps been more clear to me in adulthood, but I really have a strong sense of self. In particular, I'm thinking of one program in particular that really attempted to break my spirit. And part of the reason that I was sent away is because I was stubborn and oppositional and didn't follow rules. And I actually think that that's something that's been one of my strengths. And I've had a strong sense of self, and I've been able to carry that throughout my lifetime. I would say that, oh, one of the biggest positive takeaways was that I made lifelong friends. So because I was in an environment where, if you can imagine, you're in high school with people, but you're living with them. So it's similar to boarding school, but then you're also going to therapy with them and learning about their most intimate moments and seeing them at their most vulnerable. And so I've been, and this, this isn't true for everybody, but I've been blessed with some friends who I've been friends with for over 20 years now from these programs, two of whom flew out specifically to be at the exhibition opening.
Nice. And you speak about the sense of community in the program as a teen. How important is that community as an adult in your healing after surviving the program? Or is
It's
it?
fundamental. I think the most common, as an activist, the most common response we've received from other people is, and these are our target demographics a little bit younger, so we're often getting the kids who have just gotten out or in their early 20s. But the most common response we get is, I thought I was the only one. So it's really validating for people. Again, you're gaslit a lot in these programs because any sort of questioning, or maybe this isn't right, is dismissed, or you're attention seeking or whatever, et cetera, you get punished. And so sort of your internal compass gets screwed up because, let's say, you know something's wrong, or you can feel that something's wrong, but you're being told, this is right, this is right, this is right. It can kind of mess up one's internal compass. And I think that there are a lot of people who, once they get out, if they are able to connect with other people and discuss these things, that it's really validating. And I think also too, that it can be really helpful for people with lived experience. Certainly you can connect with other survivors of other types of trauma and high control environments, and especially if you went to a particular program that had a specific intervention or punishment that, was specific to that program, sometimes it can be helpful to talk to other people who went through that.
Thank you. Beverly also asked, she says, thanks, Sam. Do you think there is a way to create a positive institutional program?
Mm. I mean, there's certainly ways to make it less abusive, for sure, and curtail some of the most egregious abuses. I personally am of the mindset that, and again, I'm not going to say that there isn't any place in society for institutions, but by and large, I'm an advocate for community-based care and keeping people connected in the community to the greatest extent possible. And that perhaps there is some, situations where people do. I mean, I look at it like a hospital. Like, let's say you go into the hospital because, you have cancer or something. It's common sense that, staying in the hospital longer and longer is not going to help you get better, but that people get better when they can be out of there, when the immediate acute needs have been satisfied and people can be back in their homes with their families, in their communities.
I agree. And Giovanni says, thank you. Thank you everyone for your questions as well, and for this dialogue, Sam. Giovanni says, I can see how much it has affected you, Sam. Please keep going in your quest to liberate those who do not fit into the box of reformation. Thank you for sharing this information. And maybe you should start your own vision of a care center that really works.
Yeah, I mean, people, this is something that you get asked a lot, is what's the solution? And again, that's a little bit of a frustrating question because number one, I don't think the burden should be placed on survivors. But number two, what people really want is they want an answer that a really easy pat answer that can be tied in a bow and they can be like, oh, that's the solution. And it's more complicated than that. But to tie it up in a little bow, I think a multi-systemic problem requires multi-systemic solutions, particularly within healthcare parity for mental health care, which we lack, universal healthcare, access to healthcare, the education system, and social determinants of health.
I agree. I think that was well worded. Thank you. Are there any more questions from participants or anything else you would like to share, Sam?
No, I mean, did you drop a link in the chat to the zine? I think that would be nice if people wanted to, that they'd have a chance. There's a PDF version. And then, I mean, you can also go to my website too. There's a PDF version, and then there's also a print version for if anybody wants to DIY it.
Yeah, we can drop a link for that in the chat. And Beverly asks, what are your next steps for spreading this news?
Well, with the show itself, I'm going to be talking about it at a conference. And again, this is something where I'll have so I wrote an essay that also goes into the work and a bit about the TTI. So those will be there as well as the zines. I mean, one thing that's really struck me as I've been, pursuing this type of work is how people think it's a relic of the past. That's the most common response I'll get from the general public. Oh, I didn't know this still goes on. So that's, I mean, engaging with people outside of this sphere and spreading the word is really important. I also will just continue my work as an organizer within the grassroots group that I organize with, and that continues. We're specifically looking to build our community within sort of the specific area where we were, and continuing to move forward with that.
Thank you. It's powerful work you're all doing, honestly. And different because it's a lived experience, right? So it's like genuine and familiar. And then thank you. Links for the zine and the essay for the corrections have been dropped in the chat. Thank you. So we are still open to any questions but the corrections is up. So Giovanni says, you have tried through Congress and did not affect change. I have found that the change that we want must be done by ourselves. Becoming a part of Congress might be the answer.
Yeah, so I agree. I mean, something that seems really promising is sort of the idea of peer-run centers, peer-run support, peer-run crisis drop, and that seems to be sort of collective care and community care. Seems to be a direction a lot of people are going in or thinking will be most helpful. There has been so there is, this is something maybe I should have stated. There is no federal legislation monitoring these programs. Airbnbs have more regulation than places that house vulnerable children. And part of what activists have done is they have started to impose state legislation. In certain states, people have been successful. And the types of legislation that's being passed, so Missouri was a big one. And this was part because of, for people who don't know the Circle of Hope story that blew up. And so in Missouri, prior to the work of activists, if you were a religious whatever, you had no state, right? You didn't even need to register with the state. Essentially, this guy just was operating a religious reform program out of his home. And some of the regulations, they now got rid of that religious loophole. And some of the regulations require that all staff or all volunteers, all people over the age of 18 who engage with youth must submit to a background check. And if they have certain offenses in their background, they're not allowed to work there. Now, that activists had to put that in. It never occurred to anybody ahead of time that they should background check people. It's like that kind of stuff. And then and again, I would say that change is slow, right? And especially within legal settings, there's some federal legislation that's sort of been presented. I think it's a little bit toothless at this point, but again, it's a complex social problem, and I try to stay grounded in the reality of what is and isn't possible and over what period of time, as otherwise I would get frustrated and discouraged and burnout. I mean, I think, yeah, people who say, oh, it's depressing or whatever, to me, that's when you've lost hope. So for me, I always see change, at least at this point where I am, I always see change as possible. It may be incremental. And so none of this seems hopeless or depressing to me, even though I hear a lot of heavy things. Okay, Sam, please share your links for the cause. Let's see. I'll write in some so unsilenced is a big one, breaking code silence. And then I would say, and these ones are going to be specific to certain programs. Let me see, actually, I'll just pull up if people want to just give me 1 second. I'm going to put so this is all stuff that was taken from the zine. And that's going to be let's see, we got links to some articles, books, some film and TV, podcasts, and that should give you some more information in addition to the organizations that I plugged in the chat.
Thank you. Say we have about 4 minutes Thanks. If anyone else has any questions. Okay. And I think you raise an important point, Sam, that a lot of change I found just throughout history starts or happens at the grassroots level and within the communities, because we are the people really experiencing it and who are encountering it firsthand. And we'll make the most noise about it, right? So
Yeah.
yes. Beverly says she is very proud of you and your vision for the future.
Thank you.
Thanks. This is a really powerful exhibition. And the corrections will be up at the Foundry until June 17th
Yes.
in Cambridge, Massachusetts. So please, if you can, stop by to view it in person. It's nothing better than viewing it in person. We always have the Matterport at apexart.org that will as well take you through the exhibition, and you can feel like you're right there. Giovanni says, thank you, Sam. I feel you and see you. Keep strong.